arrogance? And who will believe me if I tell the truth? I don't think anybody will. He said to me, your journey, it is the journey that everyone is on. It's beyond sectarian conceptions. Everyone is looking for happiness. Everyone is looking for meaning. Everyone is looking for fulfillment. And the experiences that God has given you, if they can help anybody else, then it is an act of arrogance not to write the book. Then he held me by the hand and said, promise me on my deathbed you will write this book. What could I do? He was holding my hand. He wouldn't let go. So I promised him. But then when I walked out of the room, I decided I'm going to convince him to let me break my promise. But before I could do that, he died. With hundreds of people all around him chanting God's names and praying and showing their love for him, he just went back to the Lord. So in honor of my friend, I wrote this book. The journey began when I was 19. I was born in 1950. I spent my teenage years in the 1960s in America. For those of you who know about America's sociology, it was a very turbulent time. There were revolutions, there were marches, there were demonstrations. I was seeing the National Guard, the internal American Army, shooting and killing young girls who were college students, who were just demonstrating for peace. I myself was at such a demonstration, and I was tear gassed. And if I wasn't a really fast runner in those days, I would have been beaten like most of the rest of my friends by the clubs of the police, who I was told were protecting my freedom. It was a turbulent time. I was revolting against so many things that I considered hypocritical and unjust. But eventually I came to the realization that if we don't change our own hearts, we can't really do anything substantial for the world. That the real change has to be spiritual. So I went on a spiritual quest with one friend named Gary. We went to Europe with one other friend who was our sponsor, because we had no money. And the first day we were in Luxembourg, our friend got robbed and immediately went back to America. He expected us to come with him. Gary and I didn't have anything, but we had enthusiasm. So we stayed, and we were hitchhiking, and we were meeting people, and we were searching through synagogues and churches and cathedrals and monasteries and museums and natural mountains and rivers. And eventually we lived in a cave in the mountain of Crete, a Greek island. And there I was praying and meditating all day, every day, from sunrise to sunset. And I heard a voice. I knew if I followed these 3 words I heard, I would have to leave behind everything I knew about my life. My mother and father, loving parents, they were expecting me to come home and continue my college. I was only a teenager. Those 3 words were, go to India. So I went back to my friend in the cave, Gary, and I told him I'm leaving for India tomorrow. He said, "You don't have any money. You don't even know anyone in India." I said, "Well, you could come with me." He said, "I'm not going to. Hitchhiking through Europe is one thing, but hitchhiking through the Middle East, you are insane. You cannot do it." Anyways, the next morning at sunrise, I left my friend and started hitchhiking through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. The whole trip took 6 months to get to India. Now I do the same trip from London to India in 9 hours. But I can tell you, it's much safer in the airplane. It's much more comfortable in the airplane, but you don't get so many life-changing experiences. And finally, when I reached India, I came to Hrishikesh in the Himalayas. It was the winter of 1970. And now I'll begin my talk. I took a third-class train. In those days, third-class trains is the way sadhus traveled. There were no bars in the windows. You jumped in the train when it was still moving, before it stopped in a railway station. You had to jump through the window, because by the time the train stopped, there was no possibility of fitting in the train. Probably 200 people in each car, with a capacity of about 60. And maybe 300, maybe 500. It was very crowded. So from Hardwar, I walked to Hrishikesh alone. And I stayed at the Shivananda Ashram. And then I took a boat across because I wanted to find life in the jungle and live in seclusion for some time. So I went down the river, and in those days it was so quiet in Hrishikesh. Probably 85% of the buildings that are here now were not here then. And I found a cave that I lived in. I went back to try to find the cave, and where the cave used to be is a hotel. Times change. But anyways, I was sitting on the bank of the Ganga and meditating alone for hour after hour after hour. And one holy man from a distance was walking toward me. I was in a place where there was no one else within a long distance. He was the only human I saw. He walked right up to me. He had long, grayish hair and beard. He was wearing flowing robes that were rippling in the river breeze. And he said, "I know who you are, but you do not know who I am." He said, I have been watching you from a distance, and I appreciate your determination. Now, take off your Western clothes and throw them in the Ganges, and I will give you the robes of a sadhu. First time I ever heard this word. I said, what is a sadhu? He said a sadhu was one who was a homeless wanderer seeking the truth. I considered that this must be something very divine that was happening. So I took off my pants. It was the only clothes I had. Because in Afghanistan, while I was running for my life from being killed, I left everything behind. I had no sleeping bag. I only had the clothes I was wearing. My gray pinstripe jeans. You know, if you only have one set of clothes, it really becomes part of your identity. I didn't realize how attached I was to these old clothes until I was told to throw them in the Ganga. I took off my jeans and they were swept away. And then I had a turtleneck shirt and a t-shirt. I took it off. I was standing in my underpants. He said, "Throw your underwear in the Ganga." This was becoming serious. Because in those days in India, they didn't have Western things. It was impossible to buy anything of the West in India in 1970. Now you could get anything. I was thinking there may not be another set of underpants 10,000 miles. At least that's what I was thinking. And they were fruit of the loom, underpants. So he gave me a sheet, just a sheet like this, but it was white. And I wrapped it around my waist, and then I took what's called kopen, just 2 strips of cloth, about this big wide. And he taught me how to put it on. And then I put one piece of cloth around my waist and one sheet of cloth around my top part. And that was my clothes. And that's all I wore for about the next year and a half. It's that. And then he whispered in my ears. He said, "The Ganga will become your mother. You will understand this in time." And after saying that, he turned around and walked away, and I never saw him again. So after finding a nice little cave, I lived in many caves. Among caves, there's 5-star caves. This was probably a 2-star cave. It's very simple. But I decided I would fast and sit and meditate and pray for 1 month. And I saw a rock right in the middle of the Ganga. Not exactly in the middle, but maybe about 20 feet from the bank. So I kind of waded through it and climbed over a few other rocks, and I sat on that rock from sunrise to sunset every day. Just trying to learn about myself, about life and God. And I found it's so incredible. If we tune in to nature, especially spiritual nature like Ganga, if we really focus and tune in, how much wisdom we can access. Our minds are so distracted by so many things. It's so many times it's hard to really be in the moment. I learned more from sitting in silence on that rock in the Ganga, more valuable knowledge than I did my whole life. 19 years of going to school. Can I tell you a few of those lessons that I learned? It was a very swift current all around me. And this was in December of 1970. The Ganga was so crystal clear and such deep, rich blue. It was just beautiful. I was watching the waves as they were flowing so rapidly. They were rippling and swirling. And I was thinking, this is the most beautiful masterpiece of art I have ever seen. No human artist could ever replicate this. If somebody paints a beautiful river, if it's a great master, people will spend millions of dollars to get that painting. But it can't compare to the actual river. And we can see for free. We'll pay money to go to a museum, we'll pay millions of dollars to get a painting of a river. But the real river, do we really appreciate? At every moment, such a masterpiece of art. The smell, the feel, the taste, the action. But then I was thinking that as soon as the masterpiece is created, it's gone. It's ever changing. Nothing is constant. But the current is constant. And in the same way, all the things that we become attracted to in this world are in a constant flux of change. We cannot cling to anything. By the power of current of time, everything is changing. Everything will be lost. But if we can appreciate the beauty of the current of truth that's constantly flowing beneath all the swirling waves of joy and sorrow, happiness and distress, pleasure and pain, honor and dishonor, success and victory, health and disease, then our happiness never changes. The secret is to go deep into ourselves and understand the depths of truth, even in this ever-changing world. Another day, I was looking at the Ganga. Not far from here was this rock. I was looking upstream toward the Himalayas. And I was thinking how Ganga begins at Gangotri, above that Gomukh, and is flowing down from the peaks of the Himalayas and then down to the plains, all the way to Ganga Sagara, where it enters into the sea. But there are so many obstacles in Ganga's path. I saw there's huge rocks that fall in the Ganga. There's giant mountains that are blocking the Ganga. There's massive trees that fall in the Ganga. But somehow or other, Ganga Devi flows over, under, or around any obstacle to reach the sea. In the same way, if we want to find the sea of our aspiration, we must learn from Ganga how there's always a way. We should never, ever, ever be discouraged by inevitable impediments and obstacles that will come on our path. But rather, we must learn to somehow or other flow over, under, or around them all and never give up. Because with the grace of God, nothing is impossible. I was sitting on the rock, and the current was flowing so fast, and I was thinking, if I was in the current, it would really be difficult. I would be getting thrown around by every wave that comes, and I'd be bouncing off rocks, and I don't know what would happen to me. But when I'm sitting on this rock, outside of the current or on the bank. Everything is peaceful, and I could just observe and learn so many beautiful lessons. And in the same way, when we get caught up due to attachments and desires to the things going on in this world, we just become so much affected by everything. But wisdom means to observe, to understand who I am. I'm the Atma. I'm the living force. I'm the spirit soul. I'm eternal. Seeing through my eyes, hearing through my ears, tasting through my tongue, feeling through my flesh, thinking through my brain, loving through my heart. Who am I? I am the witness. And as long as we think we're this body and think we're this mind and think, then we're affected by all the unpredictable situations that come upon us. But if we just step back and try to see things from the perspective of who we really are, then we could watch life flow by, and we could learn from it, and we can access so much grace. One day when I was sitting on the bank of the Ganga, on that rock, my meditation, I was sitting in silent meditation for about 10 hours a day. But I was just listening to the beautiful current. It's very loud, but not like that. And I started for the whole day after day, I just sat and listened to Mother Ganga. And one day I heard the sacred syllable Om. It sounded like it was being chanted by millions of voices. And for days and days, that's all I did, is listen to Om coming from Ganga. And then very mystically, I heard from Ganga's heart, as if thousands of celestial voices singing this Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. As far as I remember, it's the first time in my life I ever heard it. But I was praying and crying for direction. What is my path? Where am I supposed to be? Every day after I would sit after the sunset on my way back to the cave, there was one old man who was sitting on the ground, and he had a burlap sack, and he just emptied it out and put it on the ground and sold some vegetables. And I didn't have money, but he saw that I was dressed like a sadhu, and by this time my long hair was getting matted. I always wanted to grow a beard, but I just couldn't do it. Nothing came out. But anyways, he would give me 1 carrot. It was a very crooked-looking carrot. And every day, that was my diet. I would drink as much Ganga water as I wanted, and I ate that 1 carrot in the cave. When the month ended, somebody happened to give me 1 rupee, which in those days was equal to about 7 cents. And I decided I'm going to celebrate the end of my 1-month fast and get 1 rupee worth of food. So I was wondering, what can I get for 1 rupee? So You know where, what is that? What is that one store, that restaurant? Choki, what is it? Chotiwala, yeah, near Chotiwala. There was a peanut seller. And I thought I'd get a little bag like this for 7 cents. But I gave him a rupee, and he looked at that rupee and started taking newspapers. And in this very artistic way, he patched these he started folding newspapers together to make a grocery bag about this big and filled it to the top with peanuts. And I must confess, I always loved peanuts. And they were roasted in sand and hot, and I could smell them. Because carrots don't smell so much, you know, but these peanuts smell so good. But I was taught by sadhus we're not supposed to eat in public. So I decided to take this big grocery bag of peanuts back to my cave, where I would feast. And as I was walking through the forest, smelling the peanuts, feeling the peanuts, in my mind I was tasting the peanuts, and I can tell you, I was really anticipating eating the peanuts. Suddenly, a large, in fact a huge, male monkey, brown in color, blocked the little forest path and looked at me with such intimidating eyes. His glance was, I am going to kill you. That's what I was hearing from his glance. And then he showed his teeth. He had those sharp fangs, and he opened his mouth as far as he could, and he screamed. You're laughing, so it wasn't very effective. I wasn't laughing. He screamed at me, showed me his fangs, looked at me with such anger, and then started kind of little jumps toward me to show that he was in charge. Then suddenly he really screamed, extra large, loud, and jumped right toward me. He was flying in the air right toward me. And then he came right up, and his teeth and his face were right inches from my face. I could smell his breath. I thought he was going to bite my nose off. And quickly, with his rear legs, he kicked me really hard in the chest, and with his arms, he grabbed the bag of peanuts, and I fell back, and he ran away with the peanuts. All of them. Except some of them fell to the ground while we were fighting. It wasn't a fight, but during the skirmish. And I was thinking, well, at least I'll get a few peanuts. But then a few little baby monkeys jumped out of somewhere and picked up every little peanut and ran away. I wasn't left a single nut. My stomach was growling. But I was learning how to see every situation in life as an opportunity to grow. Because that is the reality. That's what every moment of life, however mysterious it may be, that's what it's for. To bring us closer to God. So I asked the Lord in my heart, what am I supposed to learn from this? And then I got some thoughts that compared to the incredible nourishment, the incredible treasure of the knowledge and the inspiration and the grace that I received over the last month on that in this world, people are so addicted to these peanuts. They will lie, die, cry for those peanuts. But they do not know that at any moment, the monkey of another person's greed, or ultimately the monkey of death, is going to snatch away all our cherished peanuts. But if we can attach ourselves to what is eternal, what is real, what is truth, who is God, the monkey of time cannot take that away from us. Ever since that moment to this day, 42 years later, I consider that monkey one of my gurus. He taught me such an important lesson. From there, I traveled to different places. I went to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram, Shankaracharya Nagar, which was, now it's no more. And I lived with one sage in a cave named Tatwala Baba. And I stayed with Swami Chidananda of Shivananda, who was the successor of Swami Shivananda. And then I decided to travel north, higher into the Himalayas. I learned some incredible lessons from another one of my gurus. She was an old, dying woman with leprosy in the midst of a leprosy colony. The lepers were so poor, there was literally no one in the world that cared about them. But she cared about me. It's written about in the book. And I went higher to Dev Prayag, where by a very mysterious incident, I encountered a sage named Kailash Baba. He was a huge man. Of course, I'm small, so everything's big related to compared to me, but he was very big. He was like a mountain. And he carried a trident, and he had one of those Damura drums, and he had long matted hair. He was probably in his late 60s. I was just turning 20. And he took me in like his own son, and treated me just like a father. It was just the two of us wandering through the wilderness of the Himalayan jungles. And he's been doing it since he was a little boy. So he really knew how to live this life. So he was training me in the life of a wanderer. He taught me which herbs I could eat, which leaves I could eat, which I shouldn't eat. He was teaching me certain things that were medicinal, that were growing wild. He taught me how to beg when we come to a village, how to beg with integrity, with dignity. Where begging is actually giving. This is how he taught me. That when a sadhu begs, it shouldn't be to get something, it should be to give people the opportunity to serve God through a sadhu. But how a sadhu has to really be a man of God in order for that to work, or a woman of God, whatever. He taught me how to live among leopards, cobras, vipers, wild boars, wild elephants, because we'd see them. the snakes. He taught me how to live among them. Would you like to know? He said, if you fear them, or if you feel yourself superior to them, then you are their enemy, and they will attack you. But if you have no fear of them, and you honor and respect the Lord within their heart, that every living being is a part of God. Every living being is a child of God. On that level, we are all equal. If you give them that honor and respect, then they will honor and respect you, and they will not harm you. Now, it's one thing when you learn something in school, and then you have some time to study it and to understand it. But these animals and snakes were there, so I had to actually assimilate it immediately. It was a crash course. And he taught me even more difficult than dealing with cobras and leopards and vipers and monkeys and boars and elephants is learning how to honor and respect different sects of sadhus. Because they could start cursing you and all these other things. So he was teaching me how to do all these things, how to be humble and respectful and see the divinity in everyone's heart. He taught me how to eat, how to bathe in the river, how to make soap out of mud. Coming from Chicago, this was all a very cultural experience, living with Kailash Baba. But I want to tell you one thing that was really interesting about it. He taught me so much. He did not speak any English, and I did not speak any Hindi. He never spoke. He taught all these things to me just by gestures, just by motions. And I understood that communication is something very deep. Today there's many seminars and classes on communication skills. But I learned from Kailash Baba that if you really deeply love a person and care about them and really want to help them, and if somebody really wants to learn, then there's no barriers to communication. We don't need language. The language of the heart, the language of love, the language of care can actually overcome so many of these so-called shortcomings. After some time, I understood that he was a hermit and he wanted to be alone, and I knew I had to move on, so I left him. And just close by in Dehradun, I lived with Ananda Ma at her ashram there. And in this way I wandered through the Himalayas. I went out to Uttarkashi, where I found a nice cave there. It's a very nice cave. They have good caves in Uttarkashi. And I was meeting various mystics who were performing very supernatural activities that were defying our conception of how nature works. And I was meeting different people again and again who could do these things. I write about them in the book. And after some time, it just didn't impress me. It's just the difference between them and most of us is they know how to do it, and we don't. they were teaching me that if you understand through the power of the mind to manipulate the subtle elements of material nature, then you can do incredible things with the gross objects. In days of past, many people knew these sciences. But today, we think we're so scientifically advanced and achieved, which we are on one level, but it's so much on the gross elements that there's hardly anybody who knows how to actually, on that psychic, yogic platform, to actually connect with that deeper reality. And I came to learn that something far greater and deeper spiritually than performing so-called supernatural powers was to be humble, to be genuinely compassionate, and to actually love. That's what I wanted. That's what I was yearning for. Eventually I traveled down to Bodh Gaya, where I studied Buddhism, and I sat under the Bodhi tree and meditated and learned Zen meditation and Vipassana meditation. I lived in Varanasi, and from sunrise to sunset I sat at the burning ghats and watched body after body being burned, transformed into ashes and swept into the Ganges. I was meditating on the nature of this body, because it's going to happen to all of us. Either we're going to be put in fire or put in the ground. What is it that's really, really valuable? That was my meditation. As the Bible says, to be in this world, but not of this world. But to not be of this world, we have to be in another world. That's the inner world, the spiritual world within us. And in my travels, I eventually came to Bombay, where I took a meditation course. I was sitting for about 12 to 14 hours a day in different types of meditation, and I decided at the end of the 14-day course I just wanted to walk. I had no shoes. When I was in the Himalayas, somewhere near Dev-Prayag, I lived with the Naga Babas, and an incident took place there where I renounced shoes, so I was wandering barefoot. And there I was wandering barefoot in Bombay, and I saw a big sign for a spiritual festival. So I went into this gigantic tent. And in the evening, there was about over 20,000 people gathered to hear this guru speak. And I was way, way in the back. Came on stage, there were disciples chanting kirtan before he came. And when he came, I was so far away. He looked so effulgent and so beautiful and so graceful and so compassionate. I wanted to be closer, but I didn't. I was shy to step in front of anyone else because everyone was already sitting. So then I saw the Guru. He called one of his disciples and said something to him. And then his disciples were looking for several minutes through the crowd and started signaling to someone to come. But no one came. He kept signaling. He was going like this. Then he got down off the stage and started walking through thousands and thousands and thousands of people till he came to the very back of the crowd. He walked right up to me and took me by the hand and said, "Srila Prabhupada wants you to sit with him." I said, "Who is how does he know me? And he didn't answer my question. He just said, come, and pulled me. And he pulled me through all the crowds of people and took me on the stage and brought me right up to the Guru. And the Guru, very humble, very gracious. And the words he spoke, and the sound of his beautiful voice, the wisdom penetrated deep in my heart. And then after the lecture, he said I could sit there with him on the stage for whenever he gives class, which was going to be for the next 2 weeks, every morning and evening. So I came. I was so deeply affected. My heart was saying, this is your Guru. But my mind was saying, no, there's so many more people to meet and so many more things to see and so many places to go. So eventually I left. After the 2 weeks was done and the program was ended, I traveled again. And that person was the person who later on would become my Guru. I traveled down to Ganeshpuri and I went to Goa to try to get a visa, and then I went back up to the Himalayas and lived with the Dalai Lama and his lamas and monks. And then I was traveling, and I was in Pashupatinath in Nepal. One day, I was walking through a field. Anyways, I'm not going to tell that story because it takes too long. But I was on my way to Amarnath from Nepal, which is in Kashmir, for a pilgrimage to Lord Shiva. And on my way, I got stranded in a very unknown place. I was on an overcrowded train that got caught in a flood in the monsoons in a field. And I didn't sit down, eat anything, or drink anything in about 40 hours. And it was really hot. So the first station that finally stopped in, I crawled out the window, and I drank water, and I breathed fresh air, and I walked. And when I went to get on the train again, it was so crowded I couldn't get in a window, I couldn't get in a door. So the train was gone and I was stranded. And I asked one sadhu on the side of the railway platform, where am I? He said, this is Mathura, Krishna's birthplace. And today is Janmashtami, Krishna's birthday. Let me take you to the place where Krishna was born. So I was quite flexible in those days as far as my scheduling. And then I went and I was very moved by the experience, but I decided after 3 days I will leave and go to Amarnath, to the pilgrimage for Shiva. I was sleeping on the bank of the river Yamuna. And on the morning I was supposed to leave, I could not move. I had typhoid fever. I had very high. I was the sickest I'd ever been in my life. So I couldn't travel. And by the time I got better, I fell in love with Vrindavan and fell in love with the people of Vrindavan and fell in love with the path of bhakti and fell in love with Sri Radha, the supreme feminine aspect of the supreme absolute truth, and fell in love with Krishna. I had learned so many things about God. God is all powerful. God is the creator of all creations. God is all-knowing. God could punish us. These are the different things I learned, especially in the religions I grew up with. But I found in Vrindavan that yes, God is all these things and unlimitedly more. But beyond it all, God is supremely sweet, supremely beautiful, supremely loving, supremely compassionate, supremely humorous, supremely playful. God is supremely lovable. And that sweet nature of God is what is focused on in the path of bhakti. Charmed my heart, answered my questions. And about 6 months later, while I was living under a tree on the bank of the river Yamuna in Vrindavan, that same guru came back to Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada. And by hearing him and feeling his compassion, I accepted this life. One day, recently, I called my father on the phone. Now he's 88 years old. This happened about 2 years ago. 1.5 years ago, to be exact. I asked him, Father, how are you? He said, terrible. Now, my father's always very positive. I never heard him talk like this before. I said, what's wrong? He said, I didn't sleep all night. I said, what happened? He said, before going to sleep, I was reading your book. I said, was it that bad? It was worse. I said, which part did you read? He said, I read this part where you were drowning in quicksand. Where you were being sucked into the earth by quicksand. You were struggling and struggling and struggling. And it was the hot Indian sun. It was over 100 degrees. And you were sweating and sweating. And finally, as you were getting sucked down and down and down, you saw one leafless branch of a leafless bush. And you grabbed onto the bush. It was a thorn bush, and you were bleeding, and you were pulling, and it was bleeding, and you were somehow getting a little out of the quicksand, and then the bush just came out with its roots from the sand. And somehow or other, he said, you just gave up and thought there's nothing you could do, so you relaxed. And when you relaxed, you realized that you're not sinking anymore. Have any of you ever been caught in quicksand? Please raise your hand. Well, if you ever do, the worst thing you could do is try to get out. If you just lay on it, you don't sink. But the more you move, the more it sucks you down and down and down. So I just gave up and kind of laid, and then I realized that this part of me that's laying is going down, so I very slowly lifted my legs. This was on the bank of the Ganga, my mother, at Prayag, where the Ganga and the Yamuna meet. Not Dave, Prayag. Prayag, where Yamuna, Ganga, and Saraswati meet. There was the Sangam, I swam across to the other side, and there was no one around, only quicksand. And my father said, and then you somehow or other just kind of very slowly crawled out of the quicksand and went into the Ganga, and the Ganga was so forceful, pushing you back into the quicksand. drowning, and I was swimming against the current, and the Ganga was going so fast. And I was going backward toward the quicksand. And then I realized that I'm going to die. And I was thinking, better than die in the quicksand. Ganga's my mother. Let me just die in the Ganga. So I just lost all my strength swimming, and I was underwater. And while I was underwater, that same Maha Mantra came into my heart. The same Maha Mantra I heard up here in Hrishikesh. And I was thinking, beautiful, I'll die chanting this mantra given to me by Ganga in the Ganga. But then, all of a sudden, a thought came into my mind. See, what happened is after I was swimming, an old guy on a boat came sailing by, just maybe 20 meters in front of me. And I was screaming to him to save me. And he just looked at me and went like this. And then just sailed by. He was gone. And I just thought he abandoned me. But when I was underwater and I chanted the mantra, then I thought, what he meant by that is don't swim against the Ganges current. Swim with the Jamuna's current across the Ganges. I never thought of that. And I did, and I was saved. So my father told me this whole story. And he said to me, if you would have died in that quicksand, no one would have ever heard about you again. My mother and me, your mother and myself, we would have spent the rest of our lives without any closure, wondering, where are you? Are you dead or alive? And you were that close to dying in that way, where we would have never heard about you. And he said, I was tossing and turning in agony all night, thinking of what would have happened years ago. I'm not in quicksand anymore. I'm quite happy, actually. And his reply, I'll never forget. He became very stern, raised his voice, and said, you do not understand the heart of a father. But my father, so far, he has given away 5 cases of these books, Journey Home, to his friends and relatives and everyone